So I'll be talking to you about the conception of avatarhood given by Gurudev Ranade. Avid readers of Gurudev would know that he rarely speaks in the first person about his own views. He doesn't say this is my view or I think that. Rarely does he. At that time, actually, there was a fashion of using the first person plural pronoun. You would say our view or we think that. He rarely does this. So, for instance, if you take his book on the Bhagavad Gita, whenever he wants to approvingly quote someone, he would talk about that philosopher for a while. For instance, Jnaneshwara. And you know, when Gurudev is doing this, he is endorsing Jnaneshwara's views. But there are some exceptions to this, and one of this is his writings on avatarhood or divine incarnation. So in his book on the Bhagavad Gita, he writes about a paragraph or two where he comes out, so to speak, sticks his neck out and says, "This is my view on avatarhood." So since this is so unique, I thought it's worth investigating, and the main aim of this talk is to get you to take his view of avatarhood seriously, engage with it. So that's what I'll be doing. So this talk has two parts. In the first part, I'll aim to clarify Gurudev Ranade's view on avatarhood. So what exactly is the view? And what are the implications of that view? Yeah. After that, I'll try to reconstruct a rationale for his view. Now, you might think Gurudev was a sakshatkari. Why try to reconstruct a rationale? Like he knew the truth, so this must be true. Fair enough. If you say that, you're taking Gurudev as a mystic very seriously, but not Gurudev as a philosopher very seriously. Right? So I think that he actually had a very well thought out case, except that for whatever reason he didn't write about this. Why this was the case, I don't know. Maybe we can have a discussion on it later. But I think that he did have a well thought out case for his view, and I humbly present this case to you, and maybe you disagree, which is great. I can learn from what you have to say. Okay, so let's jump in. Let me begin by I'm sorry, there's some problem with the title, but never mind. So let's take a look at the Sanskrit word avatar. Let's break it down and try to understand it. First, you can break it down into a preverb, ava, which means down. It has the dhatu tra, which means to cross over or pass. You put these two things together, you get avatra, which means to descend. You can make a noun out of this, which means descent or entrance. And from this noun, you can make another noun called avatara, which means divine descent. This much we all know. There's a very dominant theory of what, or dominant view of what divine descent actually is. And this is what I call the corporeal historical view. And this is a view that pretty much all of us in the audience, or not all of us, many of us might share. And the view goes like this. An avatara is an embodiment of God in flesh and bone as a human being or some other living being. So think of Vishnu's Dashavatara, right? Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, Vamana, and so on. So it's an embodiment of God in some body, right? Okay. Moreover, it's an appearance of God in a particular historical yuga, right? That's another thing. So avatars have certain yugas. So Krishna belongs to a particular yuga. Rama belongs to a particular yuga. Rama is not here with us, right? And finally, when God comes in a body, he's sinless from birth, right? How do I know I'm not an avatar? I've committed a lot of sins, but God can't commit sins when God comes, right? So this is the kind of conception of avatar we find in Christianity. The difference in Hinduism is that Hinduism allows multiple avatars, right? According to Christianity, there's just one avatara, one instance of God being a human being or in flesh and bone. That's Jesus Christ. In Hinduism, we have multiple avatars. Okay, but this view is not just, it's a dominant view. It's not just to say that a lot of Hindus hold this view. This is actually a serious view which has roots in Hindu scriptures. For instance, the Puranas. So I could quote a lot, but for interest of time, I'll just focus on the Bhagavad Puran. So in the Bhagavad Puran, it's mentioned that Krishna stu Bhagavan Swayam. So Krishna is not merely some God realized saint, he is God himself. Very categorically stated. Later on, the Bhagavatam says, Anugrahaya Bhaktanam Manusham Deham Astitha. So, to give grace to the devotees, Bhagavan resides in a human body. That too happens, right? So also in the Bhagavad Gita, you might all know of these famous verses, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata, paritranaya sadhunam, and so on. In fact, later on in the Bhagavad Gita, there is an even more emphatic instance of this corporeal historical view, the dominant view. So, Krishna says, Janma karma cha me divyam. My birth and my works are divine. And Krishna calls people fools who don't actually believe this. So people who disregard me in my, so he says, Avajananti ma mudham manushim tanumashritam. So when I take a human body, only fools disregard me, right? So they don't take me seriously, right? Okay. So not only is this view found in scriptures, it's also taken very seriously by Vedantists such as Ramanujacharya, Ramanujacharya, Sri Madhvacharya, Jiva Goswami from the Gaudiya Parampara, all Vaishnavas. Now you might say, oh, these are people from history. Is there anybody from our modern period who has taken this view seriously? Yes. Sri Ramakrishna took this view very seriously. Sri Ramakrishna said that, yeah, Bhagavan can take birth in and come to earth in a body and so on in a particular historical age and time. Okay. I call this approach to developing the doctrine of avatarhood, I'm sorry, you can't see the name here, so I'll just tell you. I call this the Itihasa Purana approach to developing the doctrine of avatarhood. Why? Because it mainly relies on the Itihasas, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and the Puranas to develop what exactly avatarhood entails. Okay, so this is one approach to avatarhood. Okay, now let's get to Gurudev Ranade's view of avatarhood. So here's how he defines in his book on the Bhagavad Gita what an avatar is. He says, an avatar is a descent of God's form before a devotee. And he goes on to say, we give to the word ava the meaning which is its due, but at the same time give it a mystical interpretation. Avatara is the descent of God's form before the spiritual vision of the aspirant. Yaska has said in his definition of the word rishi in his Nirukta, a rishi is one who sees the form of God descending before his very eyes. Okay. Now notice how restricted this definition of avatar is. First of all, an avatar can only be seen by a devotee, not by everyone, not by anyone. Right? Second of all, not just being a devotee doesn't count. You should also have spiritual vision. If you don't have that, you can't see the avatar. Right? Okay. As you'll see, when we take the implications of this very seriously, this becomes incompatible with the earlier view I just gave you. You can't hold both those views at once. You can't hold the dominant corporeal historical view and this view that Gurudev is discussing right now. Okay, so what are some instances of an avatar according to this definition? The Vishwarupa of Vishnu counts as an avatar, because you can see this in mystical experience if you're a devotee and if you have the faculty of mystical experience. Shiva as Nataraja counts as avatar. Okay, so Gurudev himself reportedly talks about the incompatibility between his own idea of avatara and this popular idea that I told you earlier. So let's look at this. This is Marathi. ईश्वर मानवी किंवा इतर देहाने अवतार घेऊन येतो ही कल्पना त्यांना मान्य नव्हती. साधक ध्यान करीत असता त्याच्या दृष्टीपुढे देवाची जे स्वरूप आध्यात्मिक दृष्ट्या अवतरते तो अवतार असे त्यांनी म्हटले आहे. यावर एकाने एकदा त्यांना प्रश्न विचारला, साधकाला दिसणारे रूप म्हणजे अवतार हे खरेच, आता आत्मविद आत्मैव भवती या सिद्धांताप्रमाणे तो साक्षात्कारी साधकही अवतारच होत नाही का? सो to translate that question into English, someone asks, if there is a devotee who has a mystical experience of God, don't they also become God? Because according to this vakya, Atmavid Atmaiva Bhavati, to which Gurudev responds, त्यांनी उत्तर दिले, तो गौण अर्थानी, प्रधान अर्थानी नव्हे, वस्तूचे काही गुण त्याच्यात येतात, म्हणून तो गौणी अवतार. So Gurudev actually has two senses of the word avatar. There's this primary meaning, which is mystical experience, and then there is a gaun artha or secondary meaning of avatar. So the secondary meaning of avatar is a saint who sees God's form in mystical experience. So the primary meaning is the form you see, the secondary meaning is the person who sees the form. Both can be called avatars, right? So according to this definition, Ram Krishna himself counts as an avatar. Why? Because he could see Kali. You could even apply this definition to Gurudev himself, and Gurudev himself becomes an avatar because he is a Sakshatkari Purush. But is Gurudev an avatar in a primary sense? No, he is not, according to his own definition. Okay. Alright. So now let me reconstruct a rationale for this view based on Gurudev's own writings. Okay. In order to do this, we have to take him seriously as a philosopher. And he was not just any kind of a philosopher, he was a Vedantin. So, although he wrote books on mysticism, he tried to write, if you look at his major works, he tried to write commentaries on the three major works of Vedanta, namely the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras. He says so himself. This is in the foreword to his book on the Bhagavad Gita. He says, I think the present book on the Bhagavad Gita would in no way be less important than either my constructive survey of Upanishadic philosophy, which has already been published, or my work on Vedanta as the culmination of Indian thought to be published by the Calcutta University, the three constituting a modern Prasthanatrayi. So he was consciously trying to write commentaries on these three core Vedantic texts, so as to establish himself and his own school as an independent school of Vedanta. So I call his approach to developing the doctrine of avatarhood the Prasthanatrayi approach. Another person who takes this kind of approach is Adi Shankaracharya. I don't have the time to give his views on avatarhood, so I'll stick to Gurudev Ranade. Okay. Now here's an interesting thing. The term avatar is absent in these three texts. You do not find the word avatara anywhere in the Upanishads, you don't find it anywhere in the Bhagavad Gita, and you don't find it anywhere in the Brahma Sutras. Now you might think, okay, this might be problematic, but actually this is what gives someone an opportunity to develop an interpretation. Because if the Upanishad or the Bhagavad Gita, let's say Krishna in the Gita came and said, this is the definition of avatar, then there's nothing left to do. Right? So in fact, since there is not much said about this, someone can actually develop a doctrine of avatar using these three scriptures. And now I'll try to show you how what Gurudev might have had in mind. Okay. So let's start with the Bhagavad Gita. So the Gita itself doesn't declare its doctrine of avatar unambiguously, although it has verses which support the corporeal historical doctrine. I just read some of them out to you earlier. Yada yada hi dharmasya janma karma cha me divyam, etc. It also has verses which support the mystical view. Here's a verse. Natu mam shakyase drashtum anenaiva chakshucha divyam dadami te chakshu pashya me yogam aishwaram. But with these eyes of yours you cannot see me. Therefore I grant you divine eyes. Behold my majestic opulence. Okay. So this is one verse. I can tell you other verses as well. Now you may say, if it was so easy, why didn't he just quote these verses when he was writing about avatarhood? I think he doesn't do this because his case doesn't merely stand or fall on these verses. He actually has a more holistic case. So he says, God realization for us is the supreme teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. Okay? So let's use that as our first premise in the argument. So the supreme teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is God realization. Therefore, the Bhagavad Gita is primarily a philosophy of God realization. If the Bhagavad Gita is primarily a philosophy of God realization, then its doctrine of avatarhood must also primarily be mystical. Therefore, the Bhagavad Gita's doctrine of avatarhood must primarily be mystical. This is the argument. Now, if you say, okay, I see where you're going with this, but what about Krishna saying that I am actually God, that my works are divine, my birth is divine? In order to deal with that or to explain such things away, you would have to take a symbolic approach to the entire Mahabharata. And people have done this. So for instance, V.S. Suktankar, in his On the Meaning of Mahabharata, has taken this kind of symbolic approach to the Mahabharata, where you don't take every claim made literally, you try to take it figuratively, you take it symbolically, right? So you will have to do something like this. Okay, so that's the argument from the Bhagavad Gita. Very quickly, let me go through the argument from the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras. In the Gita Mahatmya, we find the following verse. Sarvopanishado gavo dogdha gopalanandana partho vatsaha sudhir bhokta dugdam gitamritam mahat. So all the Upanishads are cow, the milker is Krishna, the delight of the cowherds, Partha is the calf, the wise person is the drinker, the great nectar milk is Bhagavad Gita. Okay. So the idea is, the Upanishads are the source of whatever you find in the Bhagavad Gita. That's the idea. Okay. And what do we find in the Upanishads according to Gurudev Ranade? Shouldn't surprise us. He says, in either case, either in the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita, the mystical motive has been the most predominant. So what do you find in the Upanishads? Mysticism. What's going to come down to the Gita? Mysticism. Okay. You take these two things as starting premises and you get an argument from the Upanishads. The Bhagavad Gita contains the essence of the teachings of the Upanishads. The essence of Upanishadic teachings is mysticism. So the corporeal historical view of avatarhood is not to be found in or endorsed by the Upanishads. Okay, so if it's not there, it can't come down. That's the idea. Right? Whatever is in the Gita comes from the Upanishads. If that's not contained in the Upanishads, probably not contained in the Gita. So let's go ahead. There's no essential link between mysticism and the corporeal historical view. Therefore, either the Bhagavad Gita cannot contain the corporeal historical view, or it does contain that view, but the view is not essential to the teachings of the Upanishads. Okay. There's a third argument, but I've run out of time. But the idea is, if you look at the Brahma Sutras, especially this sutra, Api Samradhane Pratyaksha Anumanabhyam, you can come up with an argument from this as well. And so now you have three strands of argument from the Prasthanatrayi, all trying to support this mystical view of avatarhood. I haven't defended these arguments, I've just given you the premises of these arguments. Had I more time, I would do that, but I don't. So defending this mystical conception of avatarhood remains a task for future work. I thank you for listening. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.